Okay, so today we're diving into a book that's been on the bestseller list for what feels like forever, The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. And we're not just like skimming the surface here. We've got a whole stack of reviews and summaries to really unpack. Luckily, I've got an expert to help me out with that.
Yeah, you could say people have a lot to say about this book. And the thing is, it's not just, oh, that was a nice read. It's people years later saying, this book changed their life. Like, really impacted how they see the world, how they show up in their relationships. Big stuff.
Exactly. And that really comes through in the reviews, right? People talking about having these big aha moments, these simple agreements, sparking some pretty major shifts in thinking.
Totally. And that's what we're going to dig into today. Like, what is it about these seemingly simple agreements that makes them so sticky, so powerful, that they resonate with people for years and years?
Because you're right, they are simple. A lot of the reviewers talk about how approachable the book is. Like, you don't need a dictionary for ancient philosophy to get what Ruiz is saying.
Right. It's very straightforward. But then you read about the impact. It's like they stumbled onto this practical guide to not just, being a little happier, but a totally different way of being in the world.
Yeah, less self-help, more like a life philosophy almost.
Exactly. One reviewer actually called it a guide to freedom and well-being, which I thought was spot on. It's not just about ticking off self-improvement boxes. It's bigger than that.
Okay, I like that. And I know there's that Toltec wisdom thread woven throughout the book.
Mm-hmm.
Without getting too, esoteric, can we talk about what that brings to the table?
Well, it provides a framework, a way of seeing the world and our place in it that's rooted in these ancient traditions, but still so relevant today. It's about recognizing our own power, but also the limits of our control.
Which leads us perfectly to the agreements themselves.
Yeah.
The first one, be impeccable with your word. That one comes up all the time in the reviews. What is it about that agreement that really seems to hit home for people?
It's about recognizing the power our words have, and not just on other people, but on ourselves. A lot of reviewers talked about the idea of self-fulfilling prophecies. What we tell ourselves over and over, whether it's positive or negative, it tends to become our reality.
Oh, yeah. It's true. It's like our words actually shape our world.
Mm.
And it's not just about being like nice or not gossiping, though that's part of it. It's about being intentional with what we put out there. And maybe even more importantly, what we let take root inside ourselves.
Absolutely. And that self-awareness, that sense of taking responsibility for our inner world, it connects so beautifully with the second agreement. Don't take anything personally. And that one, oof, that's a tough one for a lot of us, right? Don't take anything personally. Easier said than done.
Oh, tell me about it. Especially these days. It's like on edge. So how do we actually do that? Put this agreement into practice? Because it's easy to say, not so easy to, actually live it.
Well, one reviewer put it really well. They said, it's about recognizing that most of the time, it's not about you. Like other people's reactions, their words, their actions, it's usually coming from their own stuff, their own insecurities, their own baggage.
It's like that saying, hurt people,
Yeah.
which, not to excuse bad behavior, but sometimes just recognizing that it's often coming from a place of pain, it can be kind of freeing in a way.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah.
It allows us to have more compassion for ourselves and for the people around us. We start to see things less from this like me-centered perspective and more from a place of understanding.
Which I think is such a good segue into agreement number 3, don't make assumptions. Because when you're not taking everything personally, you're more open to, well, not assuming the worst, right?
Right. Because we've all been there making assumptions, jumping to conclusions, filling in the blanks with our own insecurities and anxieties.
One reviewer called it one-itis, which I have to admit made me laugh.
Ah!
But it's true. We create these whole stories in our heads, project them onto other people.
And then get crushed when reality inevitably doesn't live up to our fantasies. And it's not just in romantic relationships either, right?
No, not at all. Happens with our friends, at work, with family. We assume we know what people are thinking, what their motives are.
We misinterpret a tone of voice or a comment.
And suddenly, bam, we're off to the races, creating all this drama, all this conflict in our heads, and often in our relationships, based on basically nothing. So how do we break that habit? Because honestly, sometimes it feels easier to just stay in our heads and let our imaginations run wild.
Well, Ruiz talks about the importance of asking questions, like actually communicating directly with the people we're in relationships with, seeking clarification instead of just assuming we know the answer.
Which is harder than it sounds.
It is. One reviewer described it as choosing courage over comfort, which I thought was a really powerful way to put it.
Because it's way easier to sit back and assume
Yeah.
than to actually put ourselves out there. Risk being vulnerable. But the payoff can be huge. Stronger relationships, less drama, and honestly, way more inner peace.
And that inner peace, that self-compassion, it leads us right into the fourth agreement. Always do your best.
Okay, so that one seems pretty straightforward, right? But reading the reviews, there's actually a lot of nuance there. It's not just about being perfect, is it?
Not at all. And that's where that self-compassion piece really comes in. A lot of reviewers talked about how easy it is to misinterpret this agreement as like you always have to be on, always striving, always pushing yourself to the point of burnout.
Because our best is going to look different every day, right?
Exactly.
Some days, our best is honestly just getting out of bed.
Mm.
Other days, it's crushing our to-do list and feeling unstoppable. And both are totally okay.
Right. It's about releasing that need to be perfect and instead focusing on showing up authentically with whatever capacity we have in that moment. One reviewer called it meeting ourselves where we're at. I love that.
Right. It's not about being perfect every single day. It's about showing up as best you can. And honestly, I think that ties into that idea of avoiding regret that some of the reviewers brought up.
Definitely. When we know deep down that we did our best, that's when we can let go of those what ifs and stop beating ourselves up.
Totally. So we've got this running theme of self-awareness, taking responsibility for our words and actions, and letting go of the need to control, well, everything and everyone around us. It makes sense that so many people found this book so impactful, right?
It really does feel like a roadmap to a more peaceful, more fulfilling way of life. And I mean, it's clear from all these reviews that people are having these aha moments left and right. It's like we know these things deep down, but Ruiz just has this way of presenting them that makes them click.
Right. Like one reviewer described the book as a soothing balm for the soul.
Oh, I love that. It really captures that sense of relief you feel when you start to let go of all that unnecessary baggage.
For sure. And there was another quote that I thought was really powerful. Our struggle often stems from an inability to forgive ourselves for our imperfections.
Ugh. Yeah, I think most of us can relate to that on some level.
100%. But this book, it gives you this different framework for breaking free from that cycle of self-judgment and embracing, more compassionate, more forgiving approach to, well, just being human.
It's true. And within that space of self-acceptance, that's where the real growth can happen.
Yeah, totally. Okay, but we wouldn't be doing a proper deep dive if we didn't acknowledge the other side of the coin. Those dissenting voices.
Yeah.
The critiques that even a popular book like this will inevitably get.
Right, because even with a book that's as widely loved as this one, there are always going to be some different perspectives, some people who, don't quite vibe with everything.
Exactly. And one thing that came up a couple of times was the book's ending, the concluding prayer specifically. One reviewer said they wished it was a little more, open-ended, a little less prescriptive.
Oh, interesting. So it sounds like they were looking for a little more autonomy in how to interpret the agreements, maybe a little more space to fit them into their own belief system.
Yeah, I think so, which makes sense. And it's a good question for you, the listener, to consider, too. Do you have to take these agreements as, like, gospel, rigid rules you have to follow to a T? Or can they be more like guideposts, principles that you can adapt, make your own within your own life?
Right, because at the end of the day, I think the power of a book like The Four Agreements is that it gets people talking. It makes you think about your own life, and it empowers you to take what resonates and, leave what doesn't.
Such a good point. And we've only scratched the surface here. This deep dive was really just a taste.
Yeah, it's a starting point. A little intro to the key messages, the impact this book has had and continues to have on so many people. But the real magic, that's going to happen when you, the listener, start to really explore these agreements within your own life.
So as you're going about your day, maybe ask yourself, which agreement really speaks to you? What feels most relevant, most helpful right now?
See what happens. Maybe this deep dive inspires you to take a closer look at the book, see what you discover.
And hey, if you do, let us know. Until next time, keep diving deep.